Alright, welcome back. In this video we are going to look specifically about all the different ways we have of solving circles. First and foremost, we have to start with the standard form of a circle. So with circles we introduce new variables here. First, R. R stands for your radius. Your radius, when you're talking about circles, is the distance between your center and the outer edge. So if we think about a circle here, so let's go ahead and draw ourselves I like to call them footballs because unless you use a tool you're never going to be perfect. If we put our center here in the center and I mark it with a C, when we have a point on the outer edge, the distance from my center to this outer point is considered your radius. Now, if I were to go from one point through the center down to another point, this here, so I'm going to cut through the entire circle, would be called your diameter. So that is the whole length, is a diameter, whereas half the length would be considered your radius. So one important thing that we have to keep in mind is this formula here, that your diameter is actually twice the distance of the radius. Now the other brand new variables we have are the variables h and k. So if we look at this equation here, we have x minus h, y minus k, and an r. In this equation, there are only three variables where you would input numbers: the h, the k, and the r. The x and the y are along for the ride as they are signifiers. So, the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that in standard form, in this form that we see, your h and k are positive. So, what would it look like if you need h and k to be negative? Well, we would then have to see x plus h squared plus y plus k squared equals r squared. In this case, your h and your k are negative. Okay, so notice the signs of h and k are opposite of what you actually see. So here, standard form is x minus h, your h and k are positive. If you see a plus, then h and k, or h or k, or both, would be negative. Alright, now with that, we have to be able to know how to write the equations of circles. In order to do that, you need to have a center and a radius. Sometimes it's given, sometimes it's not. In order to calculate if they're not given, you would use midpoint and distance in order to find them. So let's do a couple examples. Here, I'm telling you that the center is negative 3, 8, and it's passing through the point 7, 0. Because we're dealing with a circle, the first thing that I would do is draw myself a mini picture. So input your little football circle. I'm going to input my center here, and I'm told that it's at negative 3, 8. And then I'm going to go ahead and input my other point. So it's passing through means that's the outer edge. So this is the point 7, 0. This distance right here would be my radius. Now I want to end up writing the equation of this circle here. I already have half of it. In order to write the equation of a circle, we need a center and a radius. Now if we think about it, we already have the center because we're told the center's at negative 3, 8. What we need is the radius. So to find the radius, says I need to take the distance between my points. So x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 n squared. I've got 2 points here, so I need to determine which is which. So it really doesn't matter. So I would have x2, y2, x1, y1. And that means I need to plug my points in so I can see what I'm doing. So I have x2, so 7, minus my x1 and negative 3 n squared. Then I have y2, so 0 minus 8 n squared. I have minus a negative, so that's the same as plus. So here this is going to be the square root of 7 plus 3 is 10 squared. And then 0 minus 8 is a negative 8 squared. Square both of them. 10 squared is 100. 8 squared is 64. So when we look at it, this here is going to be 164. Now, you could reduce this all the way down, which I highly recommend. Okay. But you also need to keep in mind your equation. So, I highly recommend being in the good habit of reducing your radicals as far as they can go. And being able to take out perfect squares, as many as you can. And so here we know 64 can actually reduce down into 41 times 4, and we know 4 becomes 2 and 2. So your 64 can actually become 2 square roots of 41. Now, that's not everything that we were trying to do, because what we actually need to do is we need to find the equation of the circle. So your circle is found by x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals your radius squared. So we have to input everything. Well, inputting everything says we need to remember what h and k are. So in this case, remember h is your x, k is your y. So this is going to become x minus a negative 3 squared plus y minus 8 squared equals 2 square roots of 41 squared. Now the biggest thing that I notice students do, or the biggest mistake, is we leave it in this form. And what you have to remember is that you must always do the math. If there's still math that you can do, then you would be expected to do it. And so here, notice I have minus a negative, so this can actually become x plus 3 squared plus my y minus 8 squared. And then 2 square roots of 41 squared means you're squaring both. So 2 squared is 4 times 41 is 164. Now, what I want you to notice about that is if we had chosen not to reduce and we had stopped at this form, a lot of times you would end up getting back what you started with. However, I do caution you that that is not always going to necessarily be the case. So you need to be very careful when working your problems that you do go ahead and reduce things down as far as you can go at all times. Okay. So when we're talking about solutions, this is the equation that we were looking for. And that would be the standard form of the circle described in your problem. Alright, now what happens if we are given instead the endpoints of the diameter? Again, I would draw myself a circle, and I would go ahead and input what I know. Well, I've been given the endpoints of a diameter. So I'm told that one of them is the point 8, negative 3, and the other is the point 5, 3. The part that's missing is your center and obviously your radius. So we need a center and a radius. Well, we don't have either, but we do have the endpoints to a diameter. So we need to start. So the first thing that we are going to find is the diameter of my circle. And we're going to find that using the distance formula. So again, we have x1, y1, x2, y2. So x1, y1. So we have x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Input what we know. x2 is going to be 5 minus x1 is 8 squared, and add it to y2, which is 3 minus y1, negative 3, and squared. Again, here we have minus and negative, so that's the same as positive. So let's look at each. 5 minus 8 is a negative 3 squared, plus 3 plus 3 is going to give you a 6 squared. Negative 3 squared is 9 plus 36. When we look at 9 plus 36, you end up with 45. Again, we can reduce 45, so if we look at it, we know 45 can reduce to 5 and 9 reduces to 3 and 3. So this can actually become 3 square roots of 5. Now, this was my diameter. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to remember that my diameter equals twice the radius. Therefore, I have to take my diameter and divide it by 2 to give me the radius. My diameter was 3 square roots of 5. So my radius is actually 3 square roots of 5 divided by 2 equals your radius. So if we're looking at the things that we need, first one's done. Now, once we've completed that, we need to find the center. In order to find the center, we have to find the midpoint between our diameter points. Your midpoint says x1 plus x2, divide the whole thing by 2. So your first point, and then y1 plus y2, divide the whole thing by 2 is your second point. So here, x1, I have 8 plus 5 divided by 3. And then for my y1, I've got negative 3 plus 3, divide by 2. So then we're going to reduce. So 8 plus 5 is going to give me 13 over 2. Negative 3 plus 3 is going to give me 0. Over 2 is 0. and thus we have the center. So here what we have to do is we need to find our equation. So your circle is found by x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals your radius squared. Remember, h and k come from your center. H is your x value, k is your y value. So this becomes x minus 13 halves squared plus y minus 0 squared equals, and then my radius. So this is going to be 3 square roots of 5 all over 2 squared. This first term does not simplify, so we have x minus 13 over 2 and squared. Here we can simplify the y out, so this just becomes y squared. And then we have to square the top and square the bottom. So essentially we're looking at 3 squared, square roots of 5 squared, all over 2 squared. So again, x minus that 13 over 2 plus your y squared does not change. But over here we are looking at 3 squared is 9, square root of 5 squared is 5, 9 times 5 is 45, divided by 4. And then you would ask yourself, does this reduce down nicely or not? And the answer would be no. Therefore, this is how you would leave it. And this would be the equation of your circle. Okay? So that was writing equations. The other thing that we can do with circles is graph them. So what I have here is I have the look of 3 different equations, and we are going to graph your circles out of each of them. Now with this, in order to graph a circle, you only need 2 things. You need the center and the radius, and that's it. The first thing you're going to do is plot your center point, and then you're going to use your radius to create your circle. The biggest thing you have to remember is you need to start from standard form. So if standard form is not something that you remember easily, I would suggest getting in the habit of writing it at the top of everything you do. In that you have x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. And making yourself your little note that in standard form, h, k are positive. Okay, to help remind you about the signs. So let's go ahead and start looking at it. So this is the equation that I'm starting with, and what you have to ask yourself is, does this resemble standard form? Well, in this case, yes, it absolutely does. I have x minus h squared plus y minus a negative squared, and then I have this 9 here. What I have to remember is that that is actually r squared. So before we had to do the math, here we have to do what's called reverse the math. In that we want to take the form that we have, we want to make sure it's back in the form of standard form so that we can identify our pieces. So reversing the math says, first we can identify your center. And in this case, I have the center here. Remember, it is h and k. And from your note, you can remember that as long as your sign is subtraction, then your term is positive. So here I have x minus 2. This means my h is 2. On the other one I have y plus 4. Because this is positive, it means my k value is negative 4. And then to find my radius, I need to remember that the equation uses r squared, and in this case we're saying that's 9. Therefore, to find my radius says I have to take the square root of both sides. Therefore, r equals 3. Now, that being said, once you figured it out, it's very simple. What you have to do is you simply have to first plot your center. So my center is going to be at the point 2, negative 4. So over 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is my center point. Now, I'm doing it in red just so you can see the difference. But if I were you, I would get in the habit of marking your center point, at least with a C, so that when you go into this next step, you don't accidentally lose your space. So here I have a radius of 3. So you're going to start at your center, and you're going to go out to the right 3. So 1, 2, 3. You're going to go back to your center, and you're going to go up 3, 1, 2, 3. You're going to go left 3, 1, 2, 3. And you're going to go down 3, 1, 2, 3. Then all you have to do is connect your dots, and notice it's usually going to come out lopsided, so I always like to say we're not drawing little footballs or circles here, we are drawing crazy looking footballs, and that is perfectly fine. Usually, as long as you are close, that's deemed good enough, unless you are using a compass or say a graphing program. Now notice a graphing program, once you put in your center and you tell it what the radius is, it graphs it perfectly. But doing it by hand, this is what you can expect. Okay. Now, if you look at the second example, one of the things that you should notice is that this does not resemble standard form. So instead, what you have to do is you have to complete the square for both x and y terms. So in order to do that, completing the square simply means the first thing I want to do is I'm going to group my terms together. So I'm going to put my x's together and my y's together. So this is going to be x squared minus a 2x plus y squared plus 6y equals negative 2. So there are a couple things that we have to follow when completing the square. First, the x square term must be 1. So it must have a coefficient of 1. So we have to look at the x square and the y square term and make sure they have a coefficient of 1. Okay? So here, what you need to note is that if not, then you must divide out the coefficient. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, the second thing is you have to do what's called the complete the square step which says you're going to take b, divide it by 2, square it, and then you're going to add this result to both sides. Once you do that, your third step is that you're going to reduce both terms down to the perfect square factor. And then the fourth step is you have the circle. Okay, so then the last step is that now you've got your circle. So let's go ahead and take a look at this idea. So we have the x and we have the y. So I'm going to rewrite it, but I'm going to go ahead and put a space. So this becomes x squared minus my 2x. I have the space here. And then I have plus my y squared plus my 6y. I've got my other space here. And then this is going to equal my negative 2. And then I've got my space, and I've got my space. Okay. So the way this works is going to be fairly simple. What we're going to do is we are going to find that b over 2 squared step for each term. So we're going to start with my x term. So we've got that this is going to be your b of your x term over 2, and we're going to square it. My b term here is negative 2. The sign is super important, so this is actually negative 2 over 2 and square it. I'm going to reduce my fraction here. Negative 2 over 2 becomes a negative 1 and square it. And then I'm going to go ahead and square it, and when I do that, this becomes a 1. So I have to take this value and it becomes a plus 1 on this side, which means I have to plus 1 to the other side. Now I'm going to do my y's. So again, I'm going to have b for my y term over 2, and I'm going to square it. This case my y is a positive 6, so this is a plus 6 over 2 and square it. 6 over 2 reduces to a positive 3 and square it, and then 3 squared is 9. So again, I now have to take this value and I'm going to add it to the plus 9 and plus 9. Now, notice I wrote out all 4 of these steps, and I find that to be very, very important, and this is why. If you noticed, this last term that we got is the term that comes into your blanks. So here, again, it comes into your blanks. Well, this middle term here, and the reason why the sign is so important is because that middle term is going to fill out your actual factors. So here what we actually have is we're going to have x squared plus, we've got my y squared equals, and then we're actually going to simplify this, negative 2 plus 1 plus 9. So this is going to be 8. And then what we have in here is that this is my x and this is my y. And that's where these middle terms comes important, is because this term goes down here and this term goes down here, and that's what creates your perfect factor. So this becomes plus 3, and this becomes minus 1. Now if you look very closely at it, notice we have the equation of our circle. So from this, we can identify our information. So we've got the standard form. So from this, we can look at what is my center. Well, my center comes from H and K. Remember, because this is a minus sign, the H is positive. So this center is going to be at the point 1. Over here, my K is, here it's positive, means K is negative. So minus 3. And then we have your radius. So we have to remember that this value here actually represents r squared. So my radius here right now is going to be r squared equals 8. So r is going to be the square root of 8. Now, because we want to know roughly how many points to go out since we're graphing by hand, I would take my calculator. Mine is the 36 Pro, so notice I have all of these blue terms on top of my buttons, and I've got this blue second button, so I would click that. Notice up in my window the second gets lit up, so what this is telling me is that I now have access to all these blue terms up here, and I want the square root function. If you look, the square root function is right over my x squared button, so I'm going to hit that and it is going to open my square root function, and I want the square root of 8. Now, one of the things that you'll notice about this particular calculator is if I go ahead and just simply hit the enter, notice it gives me a reduced radical form. Well, that's not actually going to help me graph. What I want is I want to know roughly the decimal. So I'm going to go ahead and input my radical, but this time I'm going to go ahead and change it. So I want to change it over to its decimal form. So if you notice, this button down here has this wiggly sign to it. So it's got this wiggle sign. And right above it, it says F to D. Well, what that actually means is fraction to decimal. Okay? The wiggly sign is talking about approximate. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that button. Notice I get this double arrow to show up. And what that's telling me is I want to take the answer I have and I want to switch it to a decimal. So then I would hit enter, and notice now I get my decimal form. So this calculator uses what's called math print in order to do its math. Not all calculators are like that. So do make sure whatever scientific calculator you're using, you follow or know exactly how it works, and the buttons you need to use in order to get the results you're looking for. So here I'm looking at roughly 2.8. I don't need to be any more specific than that. So this is going to be roughly 2.8. So what that tells me is that I am just shy of 3 units. So I need to go ahead and graph it just like I did before. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to graph my center point here. So I'm at the point 1, -3. So over 1, 1, 2, 3. So there is my center. And then just to make sure that I don't lose my center along the way and accidentally use it as a circle point, I'm going to put a little C kind of off to this side of it. And now I'm going to go a radius of just shy of 3 units. So I'm going to start at my center. I'm going to move to the right 1, 2, and most of the way. Then I'm going to move up 1, 2, and most of the way. I'm going to move to the left 1, 2, and most of the way. And then I'm going to move down 1, 2, and most of the way. And now I'm going to go ahead and connect my circle, and there you have it. I have graphed my center and I have graphed my circle, and I did it using the complete the square method in order to solve. Alright, last thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to show you that complete the square method when you have a coefficient on your x squared term. So here, in order to complete the square, again I'm going to group my x's and my y's together. So I have 4x squared minus 24x plus 4y squared plus 24y is equal to 28. Because these terms here have a coefficient, the first thing you want to look at is you want to make sure that your square term has the same coefficient. If your coefficients were different, that would make this problem a lot more difficult, because one of the things that we have to do is we have to be able to completely factor that coefficient out. So the first thing that I would look for is I would make sure that this square term has the same coefficient. In this case it does, so I need to pull it out. So here I'm looking at having a greatest common factor of 4 and then nothing else. So I'm going to pull that 4 out, and this becomes x squared minus a 6x plus y squared plus a 6y is equal to 7. Now notice my square term coefficients are 1. This problem looks just like the problem we just did, therefore now we can solve it the same way. So again, I'm going to rewrite it and give myself a space. So I have x squared minus 6x, and I'm going to give myself a space. So here's my first space, and then I have plus my y squared plus a 6y. Give myself a space again, and this is going to equal 7, and then I have my two spaces. So my x space and my y space. So the first thing I need to do is I need to do my x. So I'm going to find my b term over 2 and square it. And I'm going to write out all 4 steps. I'm not going to skip anything because my goal is to make my math easier, not harder. Here my b is -6, so this is -6 over 2. Remember, your sign is extremely important. -6 over 2 is going to become a -3 and square it. When I square it, I get a 9. So I have to add a 9 to the top, which means I have to add a 9 to the other side. And then I have to do it again. So this time I'm going to look at my y term over 2 and square it. My b term is a positive 6 over 2 and square it. 6 over 2 is going to be a positive 3 squared, which in turn again gives me 9. So this is plus 9 and this is plus 9. Now, if you remember from the previous examples, the reason that was so important is because what this equals is what goes up here into your spaces. Again, same for the red, it's what comes up into your spaces. And then that leaves this middle part. So this middle part is the piece that we care about. Okay, and we're going to use that. And so if you look, what happens is my terms here are actually perfect squares. So this is going to become x squared, and then it's going to be my y squared equals. So here's my blue for my x term and the red for my y term. And what happens is what we just calculated here. So the step prior to simplifying is what goes down here into your perfect factor. So here this is a negative 3 and the other side is a positive 3. Now the last thing that we need to do is we need to add up. So we have our 7 plus 9 plus 9, and that's going to give us 25. So here what we have, this is the standard form of a circle. So from this form we can actually pull out the important information that we have. So my center is H and K. So here my center point is going to be the point 3, negative 3. Now you need to remember it is x minus h, h is positive. Y minus k to make k positive. Here my k, or it's plus, so y plus k means k is negative. Then my radius is found by r squared equaling 25. I need to take the square root, so r is going to be the square root of 25, which gives me 5. So again, just like before, we're going to graph our center here at the point 3, negative 3. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So there's our center. I'm going to put a little C so that I remember. And then I need to go around and graph my points. So I'm going to go 5 units. So first I'm going to go 5 units to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'm going to go up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to go to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work at connecting my dots as best as possible. So notice my edges are rounded, they are not straight. We are drawing circles, we're not drawing diamonds. So that is everything that you need to know about finding the equations of circles and graphing your circles. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, remember to keep smiling, relax, have tons of fun with your math, and as always, I'll see you next time.